Hi, I'm Jonah Comstock, editor-in-chief at pharmaphorum, and I'm here for a virtual post-JP Morgan interview with Robin Roberts, the co-founder and chief operating officer at Novartis Biome. Thanks for joining me, Robin.
Great to be with you, Jonah.
So I saw you on a panel at one of the pre-conference events about UC Davis, more of a provider event, actually. But I know you were up to a lot of different things that week, and you had some events of your own at Novartis. In case people don't know about the biome, give me the quick rundown of what it is and how it fits into Novartis's ecosystem.
Yeah, happy to give you kind of an overview of what the biome actually does. So, the Novartis biome is a part of Novartis, but it's the part of Novartis that was intended to connect Novartis with the digital health ecosystem, not just in the U.S. but across the U.S. We actually launched the Novartis biome in 2018 in San Francisco. It's our flagship location, and we now have 14 other biomes in 14 other countries all over the world. And that's really reflective of the idea that the digital health ecosystem isn't just found in one place. There's actually expertise and talent in different areas. And depending on where you go, those nodes have different types of talent and different types of expertise. So we certainly leverage the scale that we have within the biome and that network to make sure that when we are working to identify a solution in the digital health ecosystem, we can identify the best in class, period, not just the best in the US or Canada or Israel or Brazil or wherever else we might be working. And our focus is solely on solving the problem that our business has. So better put, we often say that we are a problem first solutioning organization. Right. So we're not interested, or rather, we're not swayed by what kind of solution it is. We're not swayed by how big or small the company is that has that solution. We're not swayed by whether it's a good investment or not, keeping in mind that we don't actually invest in those companies other than in-kind services. We're solely swayed by whether this is the right solution to solve the particular problem. And we do that by implementing a very basic, but often not utilized, at least in the digital health space, innovation process. And that innovation process has four main parts to it. The first part is we make sure that the business inside of Novartis has a really good understanding of exactly how to solve or rather what problem it is they're trying to solve, right? So we help them do that by doing workshops, et cetera, to make sure that we help them to bubble things down or boil things down to exactly what that true problem is that you're trying to solve, and then decide whether it makes sense to apply that to the digital health ecosystem. Then second, once we have that, we help them to actually engage with the digital health ecosystem and identify the right problem. And as you know very well, the digital health ecosystem is vast and it's cavernous. So depending on where you go and who you talk to and where you are on the planet, you're going to find different types of solutions to solve the same kind of problem, right? And so what we do is we apply different tools that we've put into place, like market scans, market landscape analysis, et cetera, to allow our business to identify the best possible solutions. We have many other tools that we utilize to be able to do that as well. And then thirdly, we understood pretty quickly, given our background in the pharma space, that it was almost impossible for any digital health, especially small digital health tech company, to work with a large pharma company. And that was mainly because pharma companies are designed to work with large CROs, with multi-billion-dollar organizations. And so you can imagine the procurement process that is normally applied to a tech company or particularly a small digital health tech company just doesn't make much sense, at least when you're applying the same procurement process that you would apply to a multi-billion-dollar CRO. And so often when our procurement teams would say, yes, that sounds like a fantastic solution. We absolutely want to onboard them, but it's going to take a minimum of 9 months. That's usually a non-starter, especially for a company that may not have existed a year ago and may have a runway of 3 months, right? So we wanted to get that hurdle out of the way, and we do that by providing a white glove service for those companies to walk them through the process, and we've been able recently to dwindle that down from 9 months to approximately 8 weeks, and
Wow.
we hope to do that much faster in the coming months as well. And then fourth, which is the final one, and the reason why I was at the UC Davis event is around this idea that any innovation process includes this capability to test that particular solution, that particular thing that you think is going to solve your problem, in a way that is going to tell you how well it's going to solve it, or whether it is going to solve it, or whether it can't solve it, and or why it can't solve it, right? So that you can make adjustments if needed, or you can pivot away from it and move on to something else, or so that whether you need to lean heavily into this and really scale this up. And this is something that we as an industry have been incapable of doing, at least when it comes to digital health and digital health tech. We do it really well when it comes to the therapies that we develop. We have a very meticulous process for going through, through development, phase 1, 2, 3, and so on in terms of our clinical trials. But when it comes to digital health, we were often, and we being the industry as a whole, we're just putting our kind of finger in the air and hoping that we knew, or we could pick out who the winners and losers were going to be in terms of whether something really worked, whether the workflow was or wasn't a problem, and whether there was enough information to make that decision. And if you look at the number, if you try to identify the number of digital health or digital health tech solutions that pharma companies in particular have been able to scale up, that have been value adding to patients and or to healthcare providers, you could probably count them on one hand, right? And that tells us that we've been really bad, actually, at making that assumption or taking that guess. And the only way to solve that is by getting the data that we need to really be able to understand whether something works in a particular use case or doesn't. And so we sat down and we thought about, well, how could we possibly do this? We don't have access to the end users, who are the patients and healthcare providers in this case, for very good reason, to be able to test these things and find out whether they're actually working or not. So how can we gain that access? How can we interact with these end users? And to be clear, tech companies have been doing this for decades, right? They'll A/B test the heck out of anything the moment that they come up with an idea for something that they want to change on their particular solution, and we just haven't been able to do it. So as we sat and thought about it, we realized, well, healthcare systems have ready access to patients and to healthcare providers. How can we partner with healthcare systems in order to ensure that that we can test these solutions so that we know what works and what doesn't work, so that what we're providing to patients and what we're providing to healthcare providers in some cases is actually value adding? And so what we created was something that we now call the Evidence Lab, and it's a first in the industry tool that allows us to scale up very quickly the testing of a digital health or digital health tech solution for a particular use case. And this testing doesn't involve therapy. So it's not a clinical trial, but rather a usability, a validation type of trial that will answer that critical question around, does this thing work in this particular use case? Very often when we want to utilize a tool that is already off the shelf or already in existence, we want to use it in a little bit of a different use case than what it was intended for. Maybe the patient population is a little bit different. Maybe the way we want to deploy it is a little bit different. And in many cases, those digital health and digital health tech companies don't have the resources to be able to run these trials themselves, or the connections really with the healthcare systems to be able to run these trials themselves. So we decided to reach out to our healthcare system partners and have the conversation with them and talk to them about partnering with them on this. And thankfully, a little bit to, I think, everyone's surprise, healthcare systems were more than willing to partner with us on on this journey. And so we've now developed the Evidence Lab, which is just about a year old in terms of its external launch. We've actually executed on several projects in partnership with some major healthcare systems, including UCSF, Banner Health, and others. To really great success. We've been able to gain the important data that we need to know how to adjust the solutions that we would like to bring out to patients and healthcare providers, sometimes in coordination with our therapies, so that we know what is going to bring value to them and what is just going to be simple noise.
So much interesting stuff there. How does it come back to Novartis? That's always the question for me with these digital health operations inside pharma companies. Some of them are more sort of explicitly linked in than others, but what's the business prop for the business, and how sort of closely supervised are you by the pharma side and the big parent company?
Sure. Look, to be fair, the value proposition has to make sense for everybody, right? All of the partners involved, and the partners in the Evidence Lab, clearly Novartis is a partner, Novartis/Novartis Biome, but the healthcare system is a partner, and so is the digital health company that might have the solution that we're testing. So all parties have to be getting some value out of this particular engagement. For Novartis, what we get out of it is the data that we need to understand whether something is really helpful for our patients and healthcare providers. You can imagine a scenario where, and this is completely made up, but you can imagine a scenario where we want to use a wearable, for example, because we think it's going to be very valuable to gain that information and provide that information to, have that information provided to the healthcare providers for a therapy that a patient might be taking that that we produce. Well, it's going to be really important to know whether patients actually want to wear that wearable, whether a patient puts it on the first time and the novelty of it is something that, that is particularly strong initially. And then after a week, they don't want to wear it again. Or we want to know whether the healthcare provider actually finds that data to be clinically significant enough for them to be able to make decisions around the healthcare for that particular patient and impact that healthcare for that patient, right? And also whether they can access that data correctly, or whether they can access that data quickly enough for it to make sense to fit within their workflow. These are all kinds of questions that we look to solve or look to answer within the Evidence Lab. And so gaining that information makes it very, very valuable for us on the Novartis side, so that we know what makes sense to bring to patients and what makes sense to bring to healthcare providers. That's, in my opinion, the essence of putting the patient and the healthcare provider at the center of that journey. For the healthcare systems, the interest is certainly in that data as well, because they can then make decisions on their own about whether this particular solution works or whether it doesn't. No matter what Novartis may decide to do with that solution moving forward, they could look at it and say, hey, this is something that we want to provide to our patients because it's bringing value to them, or provide for our healthcare providers because it's helping them provide care for patients. And again, it puts patients and healthcare providers at the center of the journey. So there's a value proposition that's very strong for all parties involved.
Generally speaking, outside of digital health specific events like the one we were at, I didn't hear as much this year about digital therapeutics and digital health from the pharma players as maybe I was expecting. It feels like not that pharma has soured on digital, but that pharma is kind of in a place where they're trying to figure out where the value is. And as you said, the successful deployments are few and far between. I think people are a little gun shy. I don't want to name specific names because I know Novartis is one of the people that put a foot out and tried this with Pear, and it didn't all work out. So where do you think the pharma industry is right now with digital? What needs to happen? What's still the promise and potential?
Yeah, I think, look, it's human nature to see something new and think that it's basically the next coming and then does everything, right? And then lean heavily into it, assuming that it will solve all problems, when in reality, it might be a fantastic tool to solve certain problems. And I think digital health and digital therapeutics are kind of fall into that space, right? It was important for our industry to lean very heavily into digital health, particularly when the pandemic hit,
Sure.
and incorporate that as quickly as possible. But what we're finding is that it may not be as easy as just saying, "Hey, that digital solution looks like it might do this, and so let's scale it up." Right? There has to be a process involved that allows for the selection and the development, in some cases co-development, of the right solutions, and the ability to move those forward and scale those and bring those to patients and to healthcare providers where appropriate. And what we found is that that process is not very different from the process we use to develop therapies, right? And we need to apply that same level of rigor when it comes to making that selection, and when it comes to dwindling things down to the things that work and the things that don't. Because as I said on the panel that I was in with UC Davis, we have a very small window as an industry when it comes to our engagement with patients and with healthcare providers. And what I mean by that is that at some point in time, if we continue to just throw things at the wall and throw things that are not value adding for patients and healthcare providers, when it comes to digital health, I mean, in general, those end users, those patients and those healthcare providers will start to lose interest. They'll start to become a bit callous to this idea. And then when we finally figure it out and actually have the things that are value adding, it's going to be much more difficult to get them to adopt those things. So it's important that we apply the level of rigor that's needed, and the innovation process that we've created within the Biome is an example of that, and create the partnerships that we need to be able to actually deliver on that innovation process. And that's a great example of that is the evidence lab and the partnerships that we have with healthcare systems like UC Davis.
We've been speaking very generally, but what are some specific digital health technologies, whether it's specific companies or just specific areas that you're focused on right now, or that are particularly of interest?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, the honest answer to it is we're focused on solving the problems, right? The problems that are most prevalent for our business and for our patients and healthcare providers. And so it's incredibly important for us to stay nimble in what we're looking for and what we're bringing forward and how we're executing on those things. The most important piece for the Biome team is ensuring that we have the innovation process in place, but also the tools that are required to actually execute on each part of that innovation process, which I described earlier.
So one question I've been asking everyone in my JP Morgan interviews is looking ahead to 2023, what are the biggest trends you see, particularly in R&D in pharma?
So the thing I see as the biggest trend is going to be what I call the pendulum swing that's going to come from the now, let's say, the now diminishing pandemic, right? As I said earlier, the pandemic was created an interesting scenario where digital health in particular became incredibly important, and it allowed in many cases folks from across our industry, including healthcare providers and healthcare systems, et cetera, to overcome this learning curve that they normally wouldn't have wanted to necessarily push against. That got them to the point where they're now using those digital health solutions, and now are seeing the value of utilizing them. I think 2023 is going to be one of the first years post-pandemic where we're going to have to now do whatever we can and everything we can to keep as much of that momentum as we possibly can within our industry and across the healthcare system. So the question is going to be, okay, well, now now when we deliver healthcare, telehealth is just a part of the way we do business. What other value adding technologies can we incorporate into that capability that makes that even more valuable, right? What other, for example, digital health endpoint collection solutions could we utilize? What platforms can we utilize to connect those two that might make that telehealth journey more viable or easier, or can expand telehealth, right? You can imagine it's one thing to be able to talk to your physician on video as we're doing now, but it's another thing if that physician can collect the critical metrics they need during that video call and actually make diagnoses, not just from looking at you and talking to you, but from seeing metrics that they would normally collect if you were only if you were in that office, right? So the technology is out there. It's not a technology question. It's not a technology issue. We're not talking about utilizing quantum mechanics to be able to do this, right? We're talking about utilizing technology that has been available for decades and applying it correctly in the right use cases in the healthcare space. And telemedicine is a fantastic example of that. Your telemedicine has been around, or telehealth, the ability to do telehealth has been around for decades. Yet, it took a pandemic to actually get people over that hump, over that learning curve hump, to say, all right, well, let me figure out how to do this. And then suddenly it was, wow, we can't really live without this. Now you have patients that are saying to physicians, well, why don't you have a telemedicine, capability? And that's just something that didn't exist in the past.
Yeah, I'm seeing that with decentralized clinical trials too, right?
Right.
I mean, 2012, Pfizer has the first remote trial, whatever that is. So it's really been a decade of trying to get that off the ground, and then COVID hits, and suddenly it's a necessity. All the companies that have been scrapping along doing it. It's really fascinating. But I guess the question becomes, you sort of alluded to this, can we take that willingness to change, that flexibility, that willingness to sort of entertain new technologies that we captured during the pandemic, and bring it into
Right.
the return to normalcy? Or
Right.
or is the return to normalcy also a return to sort of risk aversion?
Right. Right. Well, look, and that's a great example that you just gave. A lot of the same technologies that we would use in decentralized clinical trials would be the same technologies that you would use in the commercial space for, to execute on telehealth visits, for example, right? And so what is going to be critical for us in 2023 and beyond is to take the learnings that we have, but more importantly, the technology that we have now utilized as a result of the pandemic, and make those connections so that we can use it not just in that particular use case, but outside of that use case. So, a great example you gave with DCT, with decentralized trials. Okay, we've proven that with decentralized trials that's a capability that we can actually execute and have, and we're starting to expand that. But you can take that same technology and those same platforms and apply that on the other side of the coin, right, outside of the development space, and more so in the care delivery space, and be able to expand that capability as well. And so that's the kind of thinking that we need to be able to put into place, so that folks aren't as resistant to overcoming that learning curve, right? And that can only be done by being able to go and say, look, this is something we've utilized for some time in this space. The use case works, and so we're all leaning into this and moving it forward. And it's critically important to be able to very quickly test these things, so that, again, what we're bringing to patients and to healthcare providers, we know is value adding. And I can't stress enough how incredibly important it is for us to make sure that we have that capability in hand. And that's something that we as an industry just haven't had in the past.
The other piece of the puzzle is incentives, though, right? The pandemic changed our incentives. For patients, it became much more important to not have to go into the doctor's office, for doctors too, and we got very loose on reimbursement. So that big hurdle of doctors weren't doing this because they weren't financially incentivized to, it went away.
Sure.
So how do we learn from that and make sure that we're actually systematically incentivizing the kind of innovation we want to see?
It's a great question. So look, the incentive during the pandemic was, I don't want to get sick, right? So I want to utilize this telehealth capability as a patient anyway. I want to utilize this telehealth capability so that I don't have to go into, the doctor's office, right, where there might be, a bunch of COVID patients, and and I get something that I wouldn't have had otherwise, right? But now that same patient has experienced the value of that telehealth medicine, of that telehealth visit, right? And now their incentive is going to be, well, why should I have to take a day off of work, or have to, drive into however far this, doctor's office might be, or have to wait for months in some cases to get a visit with you, when we could just do this via telehealth and I get basically the same, service out of it. That is going to be how the incentives change. The incentives will still be there, but there'll be different incentives particularly coming from the patient side. That drove in the pandemic the regulatory agencies and others to and payers and the like, to figure out ways to ensure that there's the right CPT codes are in place, that physicians are able to to actually code this correctly and build this correctly, and healthcare systems are able to kind of work through all of that. And I think that same need, those incentives that were once I don't want to get sick, and are now, hey, this is valuable to me and important to me because I don't have to. It's easier for me to actually come see you. That shift in incentives, those incentives are still there. That's going to continue to drive this the industry to create these or rather to remove these roadblocks that exist around CPT codes, and making sure that that the system works correctly.
So I've kept you a long time. I'll ask one more question for the road. What's coming up in 2023 for you, for the Biome? What's or beyond that? What's exciting on the horizon?
Yeah, so the Biome is consistently looking at what the problems are for our broader business. And obviously Novartis is, like many other companies, is in the process of considerable transformation to readjust itself to what the new normal is across the healthcare system, given now that we're on the other side of the pandemic. And so the Biome is certainly looking to make sure that we align ourselves with the needs of our business and with the needs of our patients and healthcare providers. So as far as the evidence lab, we will continue to look for those opportunities to partner with healthcare systems, to expand that list of healthcare systems that we have access to, which is now over 70 healthcare systems, both in the US and outside of the US, that give us the ability to test these things very quickly and efficiently, because we firmly believe that solving that problem is something that makes the utilization of digital health technologies much more prevalent.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Robin. Really appreciate you making the time, and I'm glad we were able to connect post show.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Jonah. I really appreciate it.